Day 150. Roger woke out of a fitful sleep just before 3 a.m. He was drenched in sweat and shaking uncontrollably. This was a result of the post-traumatic stress disorder from which he suffered. It happened regularly and was nothing new to him. He got up, rolled a smoke, and sat in a collapsible chair outside his tent. He sat in the quiet night, smoking and staring up at the stars. It was cold, and the air was fresh and crisp. It was quiet, too quiet. The extreme quiet made Roger nervous, especially at night. He purposely always lived in busy cities so that he would have background noise to buffer him from the eerie quiet of his sleepless nights. He was tired. Weary was more accurate. He was feeling old. For the better part of the last 5 decades, Roger lived alone. He couldn't get close to anyone, and never even really tried. He had his brothers in the motorcycle club, and early on that fulfilled them. He was good at what he did, and he earned the respect of the members of the club. In the last 20 or so years, though, that sense of fulfillment faded. He did what he did now for the club mainly out of a sense of duty, out of loyalty and commitment to the MC. Truth be told, he didn't like the killing. He didn't like the violent lifestyle. But this was the hand he was dealt. He didn't know any other way. Still, inside at his core, he was troubled. Everything he had done bothered him. As he grew older, he was acutely aware of his own mortality. He didn't realize it consciously, but he was searching for something different, something better, all the while stuck inside himself. He always felt that somewhere in there was a kinder, gentler man, a man of peace, a man capable of loving and of being loved. He longed for those things which he never had and had no clue how to get. A kinder, gentler man trapped inside this killer, this warrior. Inside himself, more than 40 years after returning home from Vietnam, his battles continued to rage. His war was real. He fought it every day and every night. Still, he would continue to plow forth, never surrender. He was still that airborne ranger, that Green Beret. He hadn't known any other way. He built a fire and put a pot of coffee on. He went back inside his tent. He stripped, cleaned, and oiled, and reassembled both his rifle and his .45. The sun was coming up. The camp was coming to life. Pastor needed to go into town to meet with Major Stillman and Lieutenant Saunders. Greg accompanied him for security. He took Dalton as well to show him the ropes. Jillian asked to come along. She and her 2 children. She wanted to hand out gospel tracts and invite people to church this Sunday. Carl, who was going into the office he had set up for him in town almost every day, arrived just after breakfast. He sat and had coffee with Pastor and discussed area politics and agendas. He usually rode in alongside Pastor. There was strength in numbers, he reasoned. Another train was arriving today, and Jillian was determined to be on the platform, handing out tracts when the people disembarked. No passengers yet. Still, just replacement troops, workers, and those who had business in town. When the group arrived in town, Greg backed the truck into the alley across the street and facing the post. He opened the tailgate and sat down, facing the street and the post beyond. He set his rifle beside him and pulled out a thermos of hot coffee. He settled in with a good view of the immediate area. This was the same spot he and Zeb sat during the attack on the post just days before. A soldier came out and told Jillian to move down away from the post entrance. He told her that she couldn't hand out tracts in front of the post for security reasons. She moved down a few feet in front of an old abandoned storefront. Greg's instinct was to go ask the soldier what authority he has to make such demands, and explain that in this still free country she could hand out those tracts wherever she wanted to. He was angry. He stopped himself. He knew that that was a fight he couldn't win. Besides, he liked her in front of the abandoned store better. If the need should arise to shoot at her position, he liked having the vacant storefront as a backdrop instead of the busy post. Roger was assigned to the post for the day to unload and reload the train and help out with repairing the damage done in the attack the other day. He didn't mind this detail because there was more hustle and bustle in town than there was out working on the rail line. As he walked along the platform toward the post, Jillian approached him to give him a gospel tract. She greeted him with a smile and asked if she could give him something to read. It was brief, she promised. Roger took the tract, not wanting to be rude, and stuck it in his pocket. She also invited him to church the following Sunday and explained that we would have a bus there to pick up anybody who wanted to go. When she handed him the tract, she cupped his hand in both of her hands, and with a smile she said, "We would really love to have you come." His eyes made contact with hers for a long moment. He could see seemingly right down into her soul. It was warm and gentle and kind. He managed a smile and told her that the roof would cave in if he ever stepped foot inside a church. Her smile went away for an instant, and she said, "Time may be running out, sir. Don't delay. The Lord wants to save you. All you have to do is ask Him." Roger continued his stare into her eyes, and she could see into his soul as well. It was dark, filled with pain and despair and loneliness. He just said thank you and continued on his way. Although they only made eye contact for a few brief moments, they had made a connection. Jillian couldn't stop thinking about this man. The pain and despair she saw in his eyes must be awful to live with, she thought. Roger, too, could not get Jillian out of his mind. This kind young woman, standing alone in the midst of all this chaos, trying to reach out to help others. What was in it for her, he wondered. When the train pulled into the station, several replacement troops stepped off the platform. Also, there was a group of new railroad workers and two well-dressed men who claimed to have business with the Board of Governors. Major Stillman himself had okayed the passage for them. Secreted away in a boxcar in the rear were three men. They were sent by Buddy Tanner. They were members of the same MC that Roger was. They were instructed by Buddy not to show club colors. He had cautioned Roger about this as well, but he knew Roger would never take off his cut. The others, though, didn't have a choice. They would do as Buddy ordered. Buddy told them if they saw Roger to ignore him, walk past, and don't acknowledge him in any way. He was up there on club business and needed to maintain his cover, Buddy explained. Roger was unloading cargo from the next car down and saw the men sneak off the train. He recognized two of them and wondered what they were doing there. In fact, they were tracking a man who had done business previously with the club and who had cheated and stolen from them. They tracked him to this town. He was now working with the railroad and living in the same camp as Roger. Buddy had considered sending orders for Roger to do the job, but didn't want to risk his current mission there. He was completely unaware of his situation, but knew that the presence of the three fellow club members could not be good. After work that afternoon, as Roger walked through the alley that led from the main road out to the back street where the illegal bar was tucked away, he heard a commotion. He looked over to see the three men from the motorcycle club standing around a fourth man who was backed up against an alley wall. Two of the men were holding him in place, and the third man stepped forward and stabbed him several times in the stomach. He then held the knife up against his cheek and told them that when he had decided to steal from the club, that was the last bad decision he would ever make. Then he cut his cheek from below his right eye down to his chin. The man was bleeding badly from his stomach and keeled over. The two men let him drop to the ground. The men heard a child cry and turned to see Jillian and her two youngest children standing at the end of the alley. They had walked around the corner just in time to witness the murder. Two of the club's members quickly ran over and grabbed her and the kids as she stood frozen in terror. They brought her back to where the murder took place, just out of sight of the road. Now she stood in almost the exact same spot that the dead man was standing just moments ago. He lay on the ground just feet from her. She had one hand over each child's eyes, trying to shroud them from the horrible sight. The man holding the knife told her that it was unfortunate that she had come around the corner when she did, that now she too must die. "We can't go leaving any witnesses," he said. Then he looked down at the kids. He paused briefly, but she knew what he meant to do. Jillian pleaded for their lives. The three men talked among themselves briefly. One of the men was uncomfortable with the idea of having to kill the children. The man with the knife, the leader apparently, assured them there was no other way. Roger, watching from across the alley, stepped out so the men could see him. Startled, they turned to look at him. He knew two of them well. The third was new, a prospect. This was his first real job with the club. Roger addressed the leader. "Big Mike, what's going on here?" Big Mike explained to Roger that they were there on club business, that he had seen him the other day when they got off the train but was under orders not to make contact. Roger just shook his head, and he said, "Young lady, why don't you and the children just run along?" As Jillian started to go, Big Mike put his arm out in front of her to stop her. "I don't know how long you were standing there, but certain events took place that now prevent us from allowing her to go." In his early days with the club, Roger had earned the nickname Armageddon. Most of the men that knew him enough to be familiar with him called him R for short. Buddy was the first one to use the one-letter handle years ago. Since his name started with an R and his nickname was Armageddon, it fit, and it just kind of stuck to him. The younger or newer members addressed him as Sarge, or just called him Sir. "So what then, Mike? You're going to kill her?" Roger asked. Mike replied, "What do you suppose Buddy would do if we went back home and told them that we let her walk away?" Roger knew that they must, in fact, kill Jillian. Even more disturbing was the fact that he knew that they had to kill the kids as well. He paused and looked at Big Mike as he pondered the situation. Now, standing among them, he looked into Jillian's eyes. She was scared. Holding her children close, she didn't speak, but her eyes pleaded with Roger for their lives. Roger looked at Big Mike and just said, "Mike, I'm afraid I can't let you do that, brother." Roger told him to just walk away. He would take any heat from Buddy over it. He told him that it was his call and that he was ordering them to walk away. Mike looked at Jillian. He looked back at Roger and he said, "You know I can't do that, R." As Roger answered, "I know," he delivered one forceful blow to Big Mike's neck, hitting him square in the Adam's apple. Big Mike fell to the ground like a sack of potatoes, gasping for breath. The second man was drawing his handgun from his belt and leveled it at Roger. Roger moved in, and in one motion, he deflected the gun up and away from him and maneuvered his right leg behind the man's thigh, Striking him hard and sweeping his leg out from under him, he hit the ground fast and hard. The man rolled over and jumped up and pulled a knife from his boot. He swung it at Roger, who deflected the lunge and grabbed the man's arm and twisted it around. He then used the momentum to plunge the knife into the man's chest. Now, Big Mike, struggling to breathe, pulled his gun from his belt and pointed it up from the ground at Roger. Before he could squeeze off around, Roger kicked it out of his hand and delivered one fatal blow with his boot to Big Mike's temple. The prospect was at that moment running for his life. Roger picked up the gun, fired once, hitting him in the back of the shoulder. Before he could get another shot off, the prospect turned and disappeared around the corner into the street. Roger looked at Jillian. He stuck the gun in his waist and picked up the spent shell casing and put it in his pocket. It's not like there were any forensic labs operating nowadays, but old habits died hard. Jillian grabbed his hands with hers and said, "Thank you, thank you." Roger turned to walk away, and she pleaded with him to stay. He explained that he couldn't be there when authorities arrived. Having fired the gun, he was sure that would be any moment. "But," she said, "you were defending us. You won't get in any trouble." "It's not that simple, young lady." "I wish it were. Believe me, I do. But it just isn't." He heard a commotion in the street and turned and ran. Carl Fairley arrived seconds later to find Jillian standing over the 3 dead bodies. When he asked her what had happened, she just ran up to him and threw her arms around him. He could feel her entire body trembling. He just said, "Come on, honey, we'll sort this out in my office." Once there, she told Carl everything that had happened in the alley. She claimed that she didn't see the man's face well enough to identify him. She also claimed that she didn't know his name. Well, she in fact did not know his name, but she heard the other men call him R. She left that detail out while speaking with Carl as well. Later, back at the church, she filled in her dad on the events of the day, this time leaving nothing out. She said, "Daddy, this man saved our lives. He didn't do anything wrong. How can I help Carl catch him? I won't do it, Daddy." She started crying. Pastor held her and told her not to think about it, that they could sort it all out tomorrow. He was just glad that she and the kids were home safely. He wondered that if he had been in that alley with her, would he step forth and identify that man? In his mind, and in hers, Roger was the hero, not the villain. Still, he thought, this man was obviously associated with these evil men. It was clear that he was a killer. He also knew that, more likely than not, this man certainly was not an innocent. Still, he wished he was there so he could shake his hand and thank him for what he had done for his daughter and grandchildren today. After he left the alley, Roger went back to his tent and quickly packed his gear and put it in his ruck. He walked out and into the woods. He knew Carl Fairley would be looking for him. He set up camp a few miles out on a ridge overlooking the valley below. He knew he could never return to the MC. He knew Buddy would be sending at least 4 men to dispatch him, or at the very least, bring him back to stand for the club's version of the justice system. What he had done was unforgivable by club standards. The only life he had ever really known was over. What would he do? Where would he go? As he reflected on the day, his thoughts turned to Jillian. He could feel the warmth in her eyes. He could see the peace in her soul. He smiled as he was sure he had done the right thing. Possibly for the first time ever, he had done the right thing. He fell asleep under the stars with his rifle inches from his hand and one eye open on the trail. He felt a peace he had not known in a very long time, if ever.